Good day, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on how to involve patient experts in studies on early detection of kidney cancer. The webinar is co-developed by the Rising Tide Foundation for Clinical Cancer Research and the Kidney Cancer Association. Both foundations support clinical cancer research and are dedicated to promoting the involvement of patient experts in this research. It is our experience that such involvement may differ between type of clinical studies. So today we will focus on how to approach it in the early detection of cancer. To tackle this complex topic, I am here, Zoraide from the Rising Tide Foundation, and I have with us Peggy Zuckerman. Hello, Peggy. Would you mind to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. I'm Peggy Zuckerman. I live in the US, obviously. And at this point, I am now 21 years past a diagnosis of clear cell kidney cancer with a 10-centimeter tumor and hundreds of metastases in my lungs. And this was a time in which there was but one treatment available beyond surgery. And I remember too clearly the process that I went through being diagnosed, having a shocking stage 4 kidney cancer, which I barely could understand the words, and then to be requested in the course of this post my surgery to consider a clinical trial before entering the actual treatment that I did receive, which brought me to where I am today. I was instantly stunned how difficult it was to find information. And even trying at that time, which is quite different than now, most of the information I could get was limited, certainly not in patient-friendly language. And the Kidney Cancer Association was one of the early websites that I could find in the frantic days that preceded getting the surgery. And at the same time, it was extremely isolating because there were no ways for patients to speak to patients to ask that unasked question. What does this mean? What does clear cell? I thought I had kidney cancer, and now they're saying I have renal cell carcinoma. That level of concern reflects how lacking in knowledge most patients are. And then over the years, because of the advocacy and, coming to webinars and seminars and learning and trying to, again, translate that for patients into patient-friendly language. One of the things I eventually did about 10 years ago, I was called upon by SWOG, which is a clinical trial network group, to be the first patient advocate in the research of renal cell carcinoma, which gave me a leg up in understanding what was happening.
What would you say is the best way for a clinician, for an investigator to involve patient partner in a clinical study?
Well, in any clinical study like the one that might have been presented to the patient, 2 weeks ago versus 20 years ago, to have a better foundation for the patient is critical, for the patient to make decisions which are life-changing. And so that patient needs a foundation in the basic issues of the cancer to know that, for example, that I knew that cancers could spread. There's certainly people who think that this is going to stay there, maybe just gobble up their kidney and then the other kidney, and then life is over. They may not recognize early on that they have not had a complete nor accurate diagnosis from maybe a local doctor or urologist who sent them to the site of the clinical trial. And so to know what a complete understanding and accurate explanation of, first of all, the size of the mass, which is where this typically will start, the suggestion of why it's considered to be a clear cell kidney cancer or papillary, that even exists, that there's different types of kidney cancer, And there's at that time, if the patient is starting to get more information, it's going to likely be given in very technical terms, subtypes versus variants, and terms like histology and pathology. It might well be that patient has no idea what a biopsy is. Most patients instantly want to know what they can do to change their diet, thinking this diet will change everything quickly, please. So there's this basic information about what the patient has, and making sure that the patient can say to himself and his family and his doubting relatives is critical. And kind of as a last moment, I always say you have to provide credible patient to patient resources. Otherwise, the patient will be seeking out things that are not credible. And
Absolutely,
I
yeah.
think that
So
covers a lot of territory. Plus, if I didn't say so clearly, language that is written in simple language. Person diagnosed is stunned, and you have to understand that. There's many people who do not read well, especially after they're given a shocking diagnosis. And there are plenty of people in the US who do not speak English natively, and a simple, accurate, but simple language can be translated more quickly, whether it's by another group or the daughter to the older parent. So making it possible to expand the access is critical, and welcoming to the desperate patient.
So having involvement of a patient partner in the clinical trial will help bridging this gap of communication and trying to make the experience for the patient much more, and the information for the patient much more available before and during the trial.
Exactly. And I think that starts long before there's a discussion of a clinical trial, but certainly that expert that one would think anybody who's involved in clinical trials has more expertise than does, let us say, the local doctor, the general practitioner who knows the patient's, general health. And so to have that information at that time, and then especially as the patient goes to see this expert, to have information given to them in patient-friendly terms and in writing, perhaps some videos to help, so the patient can review all these things repeatedly and with, let's say, the family, the spouse, the local doctor, I think is
And
invaluable.
if we think about the early stage of development of an idea before it really reach the stage of becoming a protocol, becoming a clinical trial, why would the involvement of patient partner be, valuable at that early stage? Would it be helping with, deciding whether the endpoint would be the most beneficial for the patient? What would be the contribution of the patient partner?
Well, I think the first thing is the patient partner will probably properly chosen partner would understand enough about this study to be able to attach the previous experience of other patients that he or she may have helped, or the issues that come forward. And frankly, the clinical trial people may not have that understanding of the impact. There's got to be a way that the the clinic and the researchers have decided this is a problem we need to address. The patient may not be aware of that problem, or they may describe it in a way that is not how a patient describes it. So some willingness to learn, how would a patient see this? How would a patient interpret uh, the basics, for example, depending on the background of the patient group, which will be, a mix of people in the US and Europe, let us say, may not understand that the term clinical trial in itself means last ditch effort, that I am so terribly sick that this is my one and only chance and I'm not going to waste my time or my life or risk my health on an experiment. So we'll have to be the understanding given to the patient early on and as part of a package, even if the patient has missed that information, so that the patient can clearly address, what are you guys going to do to me? It might be the approach. Um, is there nothing else that can be done? Am I screwed? You might hear, pretty informal language about it, but that is often the case with patients. And especially if their family history has been someone else having a cancer that was devastating, or that the treatments which the patient had, which were devastating, that a trial may not be any better, or frankly, it might be worse. So preparation to address not just address them when the question is raised, but anticipate them and to have that explanation going forward. And that will probably benefit the patient. You could be like me, you say, I have no choices. I have to sign this dotted line. And I think especially when the language is so obscure, and I'm a good reader and understood contracts and so on, I see very often the clinical trial and could be seen as, and the consent form that the patient signs is in effect coercive. I have no choice. I have to try something. There's no other medicine, or in my case, there's not even another clinical trial. And that's how naive I was. And thank you. I appreciate being able to participate.